A lot can happen in court. People cry, people argue, and sometimes people even cheer when someone is found not guilty. But one thing that is definitely not supposed to happen in a courtroom is death. And yet, throughout legal history, there have been several shocking deaths that happened right there in court. These are exactly the cases we are going to show you today, so stay tuned. Let's begin with the shocking case of Siale Angilau. It was April 21st, 2014. Siale Angilau, who was only 25 years old at the time, was on trial in a criminal court in Salt Lake City. The reason? As a member of the Crips Street gang, he was accused of robbing several stores when he was still a teenager and seriously injuring one person in the process. At first, the trial began completely normally, but when another gang member was called to the witness stand, the unimaginable happened. Siale suddenly stood up and ran toward the witness with a pen in his hand. In one motion, he lunged at him and tried to stab him, but that was a fatal mistake. A police officer guarding the witness pulled out his weapon and fired several shots at him.
Walls.
Siale Angilau was rushed straight to the hospital, but he quickly died from his injuries. What makes it even more disturbing is that volunteer jurors were present in the courtroom, ordinary citizens who had to witness the entire scene. In the aftermath, Siale Angilau's death also led to major protest marches and memorial events. Many residents of Salt Lake City believed the officer's reaction was excessive since Siale had only been holding a pen. On top of that, it was not a murder trial, and Siale had committed his crimes when he was still a teenager. By that point, he had even graduated from college. So, one impulsive act ended a life that might still have turned around for the better. Let's move on to the case of Michael James Marin. What you are seeing here are the final moments of this American man. The 53-year-old is sitting in a court hearing that could decide the entire rest of his life. And, in just a few moments, he is going to die. But let's start from the beginning. Who was he? Michael Marin seemed to have everything. He had studied law at the famous Yale University and then made millions on Wall Street as a financial lawyer and trader. He was also an extremely eccentric multimillionaire. He owned an art collection, including sketches by Picasso. He was a passionate mountaineer as well, and in the early 2000s, he even climbed Mount Everest. On top of that, he had a wife and 4 children, and by the time of his hearing, he already had 2 grandchildren. So why was this successful man in court? In July 2009, his villa, worth more than $3 million, burned down. Later, investigators discovered that the fire had been deliberately set. Marin tried to talk his way out of it and acted cooperative throughout the trial, but it was no use. When the court sentenced him to 16 years in prison, he did something shocking. In this exact moment, he secretly slipped a capsule into his mouth. Then he took a few sips from his water bottle. Less than 10 minutes later, he began convulsing, and shortly afterward, he collapsed completely. It turned out that Marin had swallowed a cyanide capsule. He did not want to grow old in prison, so he chose a final way out instead. Now we come to a historic trial that would be unthinkable today. The defendant in this case was none other than Karl Hermann Frank. Karl Hermann Frank was one of the most powerful Nazi generals during the Second World War. In Czechia in particular, he even had entire villages wiped out by his soldiers. In total, at least 340 civilians are said to have died under his direct command. Because of these serious war crimes, Karl Hermann Frank was put on trial in 1946. In Czechia, of all places, the very country where he had the most blood on his hands. In what was then Czechoslovakia, the so-called 2-hour law was still in effect. It stated that a death sentence had to be carried out no later than 2 hours after the verdict. And that is exactly what happened to Karl Hermann Frank. After he was sentenced to death in a courtroom in Prague, he was led outside the courthouse where 5,000 spectators were already waiting. In front of the crowd, he was tied to a post and hanged on the courthouse grounds less than 1 hour after his trial. Next, we come to a case that was a little different, because here, no one actually died, but someone almost fell to his death. In 2018, Christopher Rudd, who was 35 years old at the time, had been summoned to court in Utah. He had failed to complete a court-ordered drug treatment program. His hearing was supposed to begin in just a few minutes when the officer guarding him suddenly left the courtroom. When Rudd noticed that the other guard was also distracted, meaning no one was watching him, he suddenly got up and ran out of the room. Rudd fell headfirst from a height of almost 6 meters onto the hard marble floor of the courthouse while wearing handcuffs. Several men rushed to him immediately. Security cameras on the ground floor even captured a court officer trying to catch Rudd as he fell, and the fall was anything but minor. Rudd suffered a broken leg, a broken tailbone, and a skull fracture. He is lucky that today he is not paralyzed, or even dead. In our next case, innocent people died. At the center of the story was Brian Nichols. He was once a completely ordinary young man from Atlanta. He dreamed of success, but eventually came into conflict with the law. In 2004, he was accused of raping his ex-girlfriend, an accusation he denied, but one that would change his life forever. On the morning of March 11, 2005, Nichols was supposed to appear at Fulton County Court to select the jury for his rape trial. Dressed in a white shirt and blue pants, he was escorted by Deputy Cynthia Hall to a holding cell near the courtroom. But what happened next would shock the entire country. Inside the cell, Nichols somehow managed to overpower Deputy Hall. He brutally beat her, took her service weapon, and left her unconscious. Then, he disguised himself with parts of her clothing and slipped into the courtroom with murder on his mind. With the stolen weapon in his hand, Nichols stormed into courtroom 8D and opened fire. He shot and killed Judge Roland Barnes and court stenographer Julie Ann Brandau. As he left the courthouse, he also killed Sergeant Hoy Teasley, who tried to stop him. Within minutes, the building descended into chaos. Nichols fled, carjacked several vehicles outside the courthouse, and escaped police in a chase across the city. He broke into the Atlanta Journal-Constitution building, took a random man hostage, and disappeared again. Within just a few hours, Nichols had become the most wanted man in America. What most people did not know, almost 20 hours after his escape, Brian Nichols had taken one final hostage. Late that night, he broke into the apartment of a young woman named Ashley Smith in Duluth, a 26-year-old widow and former addict. What happened over the next 7 hours was something no one could have predicted. Ashley Smith, terrified but composed, spoke to Nichols as a person, not just as a criminal. She read to him from the book, The Purpose-Driven Life. She told him about her late husband, her daughter, and her struggle with addiction. In the early morning hours, Nichols began to open up. He told her about his son. He said he believed the justice system had failed him. He admitted that he had killed people, but insisted he was not a monster. Ashley listened, prayed, and slowly gained his trust. At sunrise, Nichols allowed her to leave under the pretext that she needed to pick up her daughter. Instead, she called the police. Police stormed the apartment complex. Nichols, exhausted and perhaps resigned to his fate, surrendered without a fight. The next case shook not only an entire city, but an entire country, and to this day it is considered probably the most famous example of vigilante justice in Germany, the story of Marianne Bachmeier. It is March 6, 1981 at the Lübeck Regional Court. Marianne Bachmeier is sitting in the courtroom, only a few meters away from Klaus Grabowski, the man who had brutally abused and strangled her 7-year-old daughter Anna. The mother's pain is unimaginable, especially when the perpetrator begins downplaying the crime during the trial and even tries to place part of the blame on the dead child. But what no one in the courtroom knows is this. Marianne has smuggled a loaded Beretta pistol into the courtroom inside her handbag. On the third day of the trial, the thing Marianne Bachmeier had planned from the very beginning finally happens. She suddenly stands up, pulls out the weapon, and fires 8 times directly into the back of her daughter's killer. 7 bullets hit Grabowski, who collapses right there in the courtroom and dies shortly afterward. For several seconds, the courtroom is frozen in stunned silence, while Marianne lowers the weapon and allows herself to be arrested completely calmly and without resistance. A short time later, Bachmeier was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but she was released after just 3 years. After that, she emigrated to Nigeria and Sicily. but remained present in the German media because journalists continued to interview her. At the age of only 46, however, she died of pancreatic cancer. What do you think about Bachmeier's act? Write your thoughts in the comments. Bye and see you next time.